Animating in Maya for beginners, not as hard as you might think when you got a Juicebox rig. I'll show you what I mean. Hello, my name is Nick Maybury, your 3D coach, and today we are learning how to animate in Maya for beginners. And we're using something fun. We're going to use a Juicebox rig today. So link in the description below for this JD Juicebox rig over here on Gumroad. You can just name a fair price. It's pay what you want. If you're saving your pennies, type in a 0 and purchase. Once you have your Juicebox rig downloaded, it'll come as this .ma file, and MA actually stands for Maya ASCII. So it's a Maya file basically. I would highly recommend you keep this rig in your Maya folder in My Documents. And I made a separate Juicebox rig folder for this. And now that we've got file management out of the way, let's go ahead and bring that file into Maya as a rig. Now you might be inclined to go to File and open it, because you can open it because it is a Maya file, but that's not how we work with rigs when we're working in Maya. What we want to do is reference it. So if we open this reference editor here, we'll get a window that looks like this, and this will list all our references. This is a new Maya scene, so we don't have any references. So we just hit this little plus button here beside this little diamond, and that will bring up a file explorer. And if you go to your documents, Maya, and remember I saved mine in projects, random assets, Juicebox rig. In that folder, I have my JD Juicebox Maya file. So I'm going to go ahead and reference it. And now you can see that the name pops up in our reference editor. We can close that, and now we have our Juicebox rig. And why do we reference a rig? Why don't we just open it? Well, because when we reference it, we can't destroy it. When it's referenced, all the important parts stay in that original file, and we cannot mess up the rig in any large, meaningful way. And this isn't because you're a beginner. This is how every studio works. This is how I work as a professional, and this is the way that everybody should work when they are animating a rig. The next thing you want to do is this kind of thing, right? You're going to want to zoom in and out. You're going to want to pan and orbit around. Here's a quick tutorial on that. Grab a 3-button mouse. You have your left click, your middle click, right? If you click in that scroll wheel on your mouse, it's a button, and a right click. Put that mouse back down. And in Maya, it's all about the Alt key. So if you watched my Blender beginner tutorial, you'll know that the left, middle, and right mouse buttons played a big part in navigation, but in Maya, you have to hold Alt to make any of those work. So if you have Alt held down, and then you hold a left click and drag your mouse around, now we're orbiting. If you have Alt held down on your keyboard and you click the middle mouse button in, right? If you click and hold the scroll wheel in, you'll start panning around your scene. And if you have your Alt button held down and you hold a right click and go right to left, you're gonna zoom in and out. So all those things combined, basically anytime you want to navigate your scene, hold down Alt and just start clicking on your mouse, and eventually you're gonna figure out what does what. Maya also lets you use the scroll wheel just by itself if you want to do that. It's a lot similar to Blender if you started with Blender. I talked about not destroying the rig, and to a degree that means that we only want to select the things on the rig that are made for animators. And for every rig, we have these control curves, right? You see these little lines around stuff. Well, we can rotate them and we can move them, and that's how we control our character. Anything else isn't really meant for us as animators, and we're not really supposed to touch it. And those things are represented up here. These are called selection sets. So if I mouse over them, you'll see that these are for handle objects, these are for joint objects, curve objects, surface objects, etc., etc. If you don't have this, it's because you got to click on this little thing, and that'll hide them. And you might have a different menu over here. So I have all objects on right now, or it might be, you know, one of these buttons happening. Make sure you have select by object type on. But if you keep scrolling in and out of these menus, eventually you will get to this one, I assure you. What we want to do to make sure that we're only touching the things for animators is to come up to these selection sets, then hit this drop down arrow, and first turn all of them off. And now you won't be able to touch a single thing. Now we want to turn back on the one thing that we are supposed to touch on this rig, and that is curve objects. So click that, it'll highlight, and now we can select our curves. But more importantly, we can only select our curves, which is going to make our life a lot easier, because now when we box select over everything, right, when we hold the left click down, drag over, this box and select it all, we're only selecting curves. We're not also selecting geometry or anything funky. We're only selecting curves, and that's what we want. So I want to animate something that looks like this, like a little hop, but a little more finessed than that. So let's actually get started animating. The first thing we want to do when animating is work clean. And that means I'm going to select everything by dragging a box around our whole rig. So I select all of our control curves. Remember, only curves is an option. And I will hit S for set key, and it'll pop up over here. I will Control Z that, and one more time, I'll watch over here and hit S, and it pops up a key. Yours is going to be red. Mine is yellow or green or whatever. That's just because I'm colorblind, and if it's red, I can't really see it. When we hit S, it set a key for every curve selected. Every time we set a key, we know that everything is selected. And that's going to be important moving forward because we are controlling everything. We are not letting Maya control any curve. Nothing is outside of our control. Our little animator hands, we are controlling everything. That's very important, or things will probably get away from you. When we hit S, I told you it meant set key, and a key just means a keyframe, and that's essentially a snapshot of whatever pose we have. And we want a starting pose where the juice box is kind of tilted on its side. So let's get it into that pose. Something you want to do when you first get a rig is start playing around with stuff. So I'll select that control curve, and then I can use these tools over here on the left. And the first thing I like to do is select the rotate tool. And if you hit E on your keyboard, that's a hotkey for the rotate tool. So every time I hit E on my keyboard, it'll select this key here. If I wanted to translate, if I wanted to move that curve, I could click on this tool here, the move tool, click on that to highlight it. And now my manipulator, these three axes, I can click and drag them, and now I'm moving my juice box. And the hotkey for that is W. So W for the move tool and E for the rotate tool. They're right beside each other on the keyboard. So W and E, we'll switch between the two. W, E, W, E. Translate, rotate, translate, rotate, translate, rotate. One of the first things you want to do when you get a rig is explore it. So I will click on one of these control curves. I will hit my hotkey E for rotate. I'll start rotating stuff. I'll play around with it. I'll undo it with Control Z. Select another one, rotate it, Control Z, move it around. And I'm just getting familiar with how this rig works. Maybe I'll select both of these straw controls and start rotating them. And I'm going to see that this very quickly gets out of whack. So let's explore that. So this base one seems all right when I rotate it. But this one up here, when I rotate it, really gets out of whack really quick. Let's try rotating it in X. Okay, so that's working. Let's try rotating it in Y. It's not working as well as I would like. Let's try rotating it in Z. That's definitely the problem. So this tells me that this control is really only meant to move in the X axis, okay? And the next thing you want to check out is this main control, this base control here. And we can do the same thing. We can rotate it, we can translate it, but something that tends to happen on rigs in its base control, its main control, its God node, some people call it, is if we come over here in our channel editor, which is this tab on the side, it might be closed. So just click here on channel editor, and you can see that what we have selected, its name is the JD Juicebox. It's a base control. We have our translates, our rotates, and we have these two extra controls as well. And on this rig, it's the same for many of these controls. Right here, we have this in and out, and in this top one, we have straw length. And these are just controls that the rigger added for us as little extras. So on the base, the front back, we can see it's kind of tilting forward and back. It looks a little jaunty. And the one that I'm after is this left and right. And it's doing the same thing just on the left and right. It looks like it's doing these excited little steps, and that's what I want to play with. So we already selected all our curves and we set our first keyframe. And now that we've explored the rig and we know what controls we're going to use, we're going to set up our first pose. Select that main control and hit that left right. And when you select this left right, just left click it, it'll stay selected. If we hold our middle mouse button down in our viewport, this square here, so just hold your middle mouse down anywhere and drag right to left. And you can see over in the channel box over here that that value is going to change when you move your mouse. And obviously you can see that the juice box is moving when we do that. And that'll work for any control. If we click on Translate X have our mouse over here and then hold a middle click down and drag, you can see we're moving it. So that's how I like to control anything in the channel box, especially these custom controls. So I'll click left, right, I'll click and hold a middle mouse, and I'll do this. And I want to obey the laws of balance. So if he's going like this, I want the rest of his torso leaned over to help balance him out. So I'll click that middle one. I'll hit E for rotate. Rotate that a little bit. Select that top control curve. Rotate that a little bit. Yeah, okay. I'm all right with that. And you know what? If this was a person and we're pretending that the straw is, say, the head, then it should probably be facing this way a little bit, right? So I just selected the base of that straw and I rotated it on the y-axis. Now, if you're having trouble with this and your axes aren't pointing in the same direction as mine, come over to your move tool and double click it, and it'll bring up this tool settings window. And under rotate settings, in the axis orientation, right now mine says object. If yours says world, you'll see that your axis is not aligned the same way mine is. We want to make sure that we are aligned to object, and it's the same in your move tool. You want things moving in object for the most part. You can see that in object mode, my axes will line up with where my object is pointed. But if it's on world mode, the axis lines up to the world. No matter what we do, it's always going to be straight up and down, straight side to side. And again, that's just a double click on the tool to bring up this window, click the drop down menu and hit object. Now we want to set another keyframe. So we'll select everything. And now we're going to go forward in time. So this right here is called the timeline. And these numbers represent frames. And each frame is 1/24th of a second. You can see that over here. I have 24 FPS or frames per second. If yours isn't that, click on this arrow and just set it to 24 FPS. And about half a second in, I want to change this pose to the opposite foot. So that means if I want half a second and there are 24 frames in a second, I want to switch poses on the 12th frame. So I'm going to go 12 frames ahead of 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That puts me on frame 13 because I started on frame 1. So you can just click and drag and you'll start scrubbing on the timeline, or you can just left click on wherever you think 13 is. And again, we'll make sure we have everything box selected and we'll hit S on our keyboard to set a key. And now that we have our second keyframe set and we have everything set, so nothing's getting out of our hands, we're going to pose out our juice box into its second pose. So I'll select this main node here, click my left right controller, and I can either eyeball this, or since it's at 2.7, here's something we can do. I can click on that number and all of a sudden I can input a value in here. So if it's 2.7 over here, what if I typed in -2.7 and then hit enter on my keyboard? Now it is exactly in the opposite direction. Now we can't always do that. I mean, you could go through your whole thing, select each curve and do negative, and then the top one, and do the same thing, click it and click again, say negative and enter. But it's just not as fun that way. So it's totally fine to just eyeball some of this stuff. I'll eyeball this straw, I'll click the base, and then I'm gonna point it in, because again, if it's a head, you kind of want the head's kind of opposite of where the rest of the body is going. So that's kind of what I want there. If I flip through these two poses, if I hit comma and period on my keyboard, or those less than, greater than symbols, that's a hotkey to switch from keyframe to keyframe. So that's our first one. That's our second one. Pretty happy with that. That's pretty much exactly what I want. If I play it back over here, these controls, if I hit play, you should see that, but now we have all this dead space, all these extra frames, like 120 frames where nothing happens. So let's hit this square to stop it. And you see this thing right here? If we click and hold on this square, it's changing our timeline. And we can move this down and we'll kind of stretch what we see to the length of our actual animation. And now if I press play, we're just seeing our animation. Now I want this to loop, so I'm gonna want it to start there, go here, and then come back to here, which means that I'm gonna have to have another frame, 12 frames after this, that matches this one. So I'm gonna set that up now. Box select all that, come to frame 13, then count to 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That puts me on frame 25. I'll hit S to set key. And now I want to copy this first frame over to frame 25. So I'll click on one, right click on it, copy, click on 25, right click, and in paste, I'll select paste. And now when I scrub, it starts on its left foot, heads over to its right foot, our left, and goes back to its left foot, or our right. And that's gonna be a loop because the first frame and the last frame are the same. So I'm gonna click on this square again and drag it back so that we can see that, and I'll press play. And now we can see it looping, which is great. But something that I'm not super happy about is now I have all this dead space over here. So look at this, okay? So this is 1, we're starting at 1. And then you can see here, we're showing up till frame 25, which is true. We can see that over here. We're only seeing 25 on our timeline. That's what this means. And that's what this means. It's showing 25, but there are 200 frames over here. So if I pull this all the way out, it's showing those 200 frames as indicated here. So let's change that. Maybe I can change my full range to 25. And now you can see I'm showing 1 to 25, and I don't have all this dead space, right? Because that's also at 25. So it looks pretty cool, but I think there's more that we can add to this. So let's add some more poses to better control our animation. Stop that, and then let's go halfway between frame 1 and frame 13, and we'll break this animation down. We're going to add a breakdown. So halfway of 12 is 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And because we want a new pose, again, make sure we select everything and hit S to set a key, because we are setting a new keyframe. We are setting a new pose. And again, we are animators. We control everything. So we select everything and set a key on every single one of those controls. So let's take a look at this. I will press, once again, the less than and greater signs on my keyboard to flip through them. We're starting on this foot, going down onto the other foot. Here's something we need to know. Everything on the human body is connected. We are basically one big chain or one big piece of seaweed. And that means that every time we move, we are arcing. We're creating little arcs in everything we do. Anytime I move in a certain way, my hand will arc, my head will arc, my torso is arcing. Every part of my body is drawing little circles around. If you were to track my hand moving, if you were to track the way that my head moves in this shot, all you would see are a bunch of arcs, right? If you drew a dot on my nose for every single frame that I moved, you'd just see a bunch of pretty arcs going. And we want to follow that principle even when we're just animating a juice box. So if I start here, come down here and go up here, I want to accentuate the arcs in this middle spot by pushing things down. I will select my middle control and then come over to my channel box editor and find our squash and stretch control. And I'll click on that, bring my mouse over, and just like before, click and hold the middle mouse and start dragging left and right. And we'll see that this is stretching it out or it's squashing it down. And we want to squash down our juice box, right? Because we want to accentuate that arc in the middle. In addition to that, we could rotate it. So I'll hit E on my keyboard, the hotkey for rotate, our rotate tool, and I'll select that X axis and left click and drag to rotate it a bit. And I can do the same to this top one. Rotate it a bit. And we could even accentuate the straw here by rotating that down as well. So now our juice box is really crunching down in the middle, and we're accentuating that arc, and that's going to look a lot nicer. But now it's not doing it here. So we have to do the exact same thing between these two poses. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 6 is half of 12. Select everything. S on your keyboard to set a keyframe, because we are making a new pose. We are setting a new pose, and we're going to accentuate that arc by clicking on this middle one. Click on squash and stretch, middle click and drag to squash it down a bit. And then we'll hit E on our keyboards to rotate that in the X axis and the top one, so we get a nice curve, and we'll accentuate the straw as well. And now not only does it come down here, but it also comes down on the way back, which is great. However, right now, Maya is automatically in-betweening everything between our two keyframes, which means that this starts squashing down mid-step, which I don't want. I want it to start squashing when it's a lot closer to the ground. So let's break this down again. We'll add another breakdown on everything again, because we work clean, we control everything. And halfway between 1 and 7 is 4. I can pretty much just eyeball them at this point. And I'll hit S to set a key because it's a new pose. And I'm gonna undo some of the stuff I've done. So I'll click that middle one, and under squash and stretch, I'll click on the value so I can enter a value of 0 and hit enter. And now between here and here, there's no squash. It only starts squashing between 4 and 7, right? Look at this value here, okay? So it's 0 until frame 4, and then from frame 4 to 7, it goes up to 6.9. And if you want, you could even undo a little bit of that rotation. So maybe we pull some of that back. And when I pull it back, I'm also looking at my channel box to make sure I don't go past 0. So maybe I'll put a little bit of that back in. So now it's going down, but it doesn't really rotate that much until we get to 4 to 7. And that's when it starts squashing down as well. In the same vein, we can drag this straw up. As our juice box comes down, our straw goes up a little bit. It kind of drags. And then it only goes down at the bottom point. Now, likewise, we can break this space down here too. So we'll go halfway between them, select everything, hit S on our keyboards, and we'll break this one down too. Select our middle control. We'll take away the squash and stretch so that it has to come back up by here. We can drag this straw, right? So as the juice box comes up, the straw should stay down a little bit, right? It should drag a bit. And on the way up, we could drag rotation. And now we kind of want to go opposite of where we started and accentuate that drag, right? In fact, we could even put it a little backwards if we really wanted to accentuate that drag here. Then it comes down, and then it starts in the middle here curved. So it's going to drag kind of curved. And we could even accentuate that if we wanted to. So it comes up and it drags, and you can see the straw dragging as well. And then we come back up here. Now we have to do the same thing and break down between these two. Select everything, hit S, drag that rotation, drag that straw, check it. It's dragging. We've already got our middle pose. Select everything. Set a breakdown here by hitting S on your keyboard because we're setting a new pose. Since we're coming from a down position, we're going to drag that curve, and we're especially going to drag that straw, and then it comes back to the top. I'll play it back. And now we can see that the juice box looks a lot more cartoony. It looks kind of like it's marching or something. We can see some nice drag on that straw. We can see some cool rotation happening. And as we orbit around, we can just see that it's a cool animation. So if you're playing yours back and it doesn't look like it's animating, here's what might be happening. Stop playback, select all your curves, go to Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, and we'll get into this more next week. So hit that subscribe button because you don't want to miss it. This is an extremely powerful piece of Maya. And to start animating our juice box, if yours isn't, just box select all of this and press auto tangents. This button right here, this A with this little curve around it, and now play it back and you should have what I have, which is a juice box animating. We can stop playback, close that window. Now hit play, and you've got your animation. Next week, I'm gonna dive deeper into the graph editor, and again, so powerful, you don't wanna miss it. So hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell, come hang out next week. Best of luck on this project. I know you can do it. I hope this was a fun tutorial for you guys. Bye. Okay, so this is gonna be a test of your boys. Audio, that was the dumbest thing I've ever done. I hope that's deleted immediately and is not found in my recycle bin.